I did not say that. I filed it instead, the way I filed every transaction that closed cleanly, with nothing owed on either side once the terms were met. I was auditing a labor bond dissolution on the trade concourse of Drantha Prime, verifying that a contracted service relationship between two Ferikai households had concluded with all obligations settled, no residual debt, no lingering claim, when the survey reassignment reached me. I was Ferikai of the Dranth Cluster, Xenobiology Attaché to the Compact's Contractual Relations Division, and in 180 cycles of service I had audited, mediated, or dissolved over 9,000 bonded relationships across 41 species. My own civilization had built its entire social architecture on this single premise. Loyalty without contract was not loyalty. It was unenforceable sentiment, unreliable and therefore worthless as a basis for cooperation. Every Ferikai relationship of consequence, familial, professional, even what other species might call friendship, existed within a binding agreement specifying terms, duration, and remedy for breach. I did not carry a visible wound the way Deathworlder cultures counted their cost in scar tissue. I carried mine in the contract scar tattooed across both forearms, the ledger mark of my own first bond, dissolved 80 cycles earlier when the household that raised me determined the relationship's terms had been fulfilled and renewal was not economically justified. I did not consider this cruel. It was simply how bonds concluded when their purpose had been served. Division Liaison Corps found me mid-audit. New candidate world. Designation: human. Homeworld flagged by survey drones for a category error in prior social bond documentation. Specify the error. The drones logged sustained interspecies bond behavior between humans and a domesticated companion species, extending well beyond any contractual framework the drones could identify. No renewal terms. No dissolution clause exercised despite decades of continued relationship, their term, not mine. In 180 cycles, I had never encountered a bond with no dissolution clause that had simply never been exercised on either side across an entire relationship's duration. Every bond concluded eventually. That was what made it a bond rather than an obligation without edges. I logged the irregularity and diverted a survey vessel toward the assignment, expecting to identify the missing contractual structure within a single cycle and correct the drone's documentation error. I brought two attachés, Vel, a contract law specialist who treated every undocumented obligation as an error requiring correction, and Sira, junior enough that her questions had not yet been trained out of her. The human world's provisional file described unremarkable social structures, kinship bonds, economic exchange, nothing our division's models would flag as unusual. The anomaly, per the drones, was isolated entirely to interactions between humans and a specific companion species, domesticated canines. By every framework my division used, this should have resolved within hours as a minor terminology confusion. I did not expect what the drones had actually identified. We settled our vessel in cloaked orbit above a temperate inland region, and I began the standard bond audit sweep that should have concluded the matter immediately. It did not conclude. The first anomalous entry arrived on the second day, and like every entry that followed, it announced itself as something almost too simple to log formally. Local surveillance recorded a human male. Designation later confirmed as Walt Higgins. 63 years of age by growth rate approximation, blind. A sensory deficit our matrix flagged as significant navigational impairment, accompanied by a canine companion, designation Buster, through a partially collapsed pedestrian structure during a minor seismic event. There was no verbal command structure our translation matrix could identify governing the animal's movement decisions. It simply moved, adjusting path and pace in response to structural hazards our own sensors had only just detected, and the human simply trusted it, completely, without hesitation, without verification. Vel ran the coordination pattern twice. There is no formal training protocol evident in this interaction. No command-response structure matching any working animal doctrine we've surveyed elsewhere. The animal is making autonomous navigational decisions, and the human is accepting them without independent verification. That is a description of trust without audit. It is a description of an unaudited bond, functioning at a reliability level that should require constant verification to sustain. I cannot model how it sustains itself without one. I filed the entry as Bondestücke undocumented and continued the sweep, though something in my ledger-scared forearms had already begun logging a question with no contractual precedent to answer it. The catalog grew, and it grew toward a pattern my 180 cycles had no claws to hold. I observed Higgins speaking to the animal continuously during the crossing. Translated words our matrix rendered as informationally empty. "Good boy, that's my good boy, we're almost there," repeated, offering no navigational data, no command content of any kind. And yet the animal's gait pattern shifted measurably in response each time, more confident, more direct, as though the meaningless words were themselves load-bearing. "There is no transactional content in that speech," Sira said, watching beside me. "He is not commanding it. He is not rewarding it with anything material. What is he giving it?" "I do not know," I said. And it was the first time in 180 cycles I had said those words to a subordinate without a contractual framework trailing immediately behind them. I observed, cross-referenced against 4 years of local veterinary and municipal records, that Buster had, 11 months earlier, sustained an injury during a separate incident, a vehicular collision that occurred while positioned between Higgins and an approaching hazard neither party's insurance documentation could establish the animal had been trained to intercept. Higgins had, per financial records, allocated a sum equivalent to 61% of his quarterly income toward the animal's veterinary recovery, incurring personal debt to do so, with no contractual obligation compelling the expenditure and no market mechanism by which the animal could compensate him for it. "That is an asymmetric transaction," Vel said, disturbed in a register I had not previously heard from him. "He has given resources he could not recover to a party incapable of formal reciprocation, and the record shows he would do it again without hesitation. On Dranth, we would call this exploitation of one party by the other. But I cannot determine which party is being exploited. Possibly neither." I did not have an answer. I filed the question, the way I had begun filing everything that resisted resolution. The pattern sharpened on the 9th day, when I observed an interaction between Higgins and a compact adjacent trade concept, our translation matrix, flagged with unusual clarity. A younger relative, designation confirmed as his niece, offering to purchase him a newer, more capable service animal with improved training credentials, framing the offer as a straightforward upgrade. Higgins declined. Translated, "Buster doesn't need replacing. He's not a piece of equipment. We've been together 11 years. You don't trade in a partner because a newer model came out." "Partner," Sira repeated. "Not asset, not tool." He used a relational term for an animal with no contractual standing of any kind. I am aware of the term he used. Attaché. Is it possible the bond isn't undocumented because it's incomplete? Is it possible it's undocumented because documentation was never the mechanism holding it together? I filed her question without answering it, because I had begun, against every principle my division had built across 180 cycles, to suspect she had identified something true. I did not yet have the framework to accept. The crisis, when it arrived through our own failure, the way it always does. Our vessel's containment field, degraded by an extended low-orbit observation cycle none of my prior audits had required, fractured during a routine repositioning above the inland region on the 12th day. Vel caught the fault 7 seconds before critical failure. Insufficient time for controlled displacement. We came down hard at the edge of a residential greenbelt near Higgins's residence, cloak failing entirely on impact. My own lower carapace pinned beneath a collapsed support strut in a position that made independent extraction, by Sira's diagnostic readout, structurally impossible without assistance neither she nor Vel, both smaller-framed, could provide alone. Division protocol was absolute. A vessel suffering catastrophic failure over an uncontacted world executes silent emergency extraction regardless of crew injury, or accepts total loss rather than risk direct contact that could compromise compact first contact doctrine. I gave the order. It failed. The same fracture that had grounded us had corrupted our extraction beacon beyond field repair, and I had, by Vel's calculation, perhaps 11 minutes before compounding structural damage, made my condition unrecoverable regardless of subsequent extraction. I do not fully understand, even now, what made me transmit an open distress signal in direct violation of 180 cycles of doctrine I had personally enforced, rather than accept silent loss as protocol demanded. I told the tribunal afterward that the compounding injury timeline made silent loss functionally certain rather than merely probable, and that was true. It was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I had spent 12 days watching a man spend money he did not have on a partner who could never repay him, refuse to trade that partner for a superior replacement, and trust a bond with no enforceable terms completely. And some part of my contract-scared framework had concluded, without authorization, that if my crew was going to be found broken and unrecoverable on an alien street, it should happen near the one human on this planet who had already demonstrated he did not require a contract to decide something was worth showing up for. Buster reached us first. Higgins, navigating by the animal's sudden change in pace and direction, followed within 90 seconds, arriving at the wreckage without visual confirmation of what had crashed, relying entirely on the same unaudited bond Vel had spent 9 days failing to model. "Buster, what is it?" Higgins said, translated, and the animal's behavior. Circling the wreckage, returning to Higgins' side, moving toward the breach in our hull and back again, communicated something our own species' most sophisticated bond training had never achieved without formal signal protocol. Higgins understood it anyway, immediately, without translation, without contract. "Something's hurt in there," he said, and moved toward the wreckage with no sensory confirmation of what he was moving toward, guided entirely by an animal he had no enforceable claim on and had chosen, for 11 years, to trust regardless. He found the breach by touch, reached in, and his hands found my pinned carapace before his mind could have processed what he was touching. He did not withdraw. "Okay," he said, voice steady in the register I had begun, across 12 days to recognize as fear given somewhere useful to go rather than allowed to paralyze. "Okay, you're stuck on something. Buster, stay. I need both hands." He worked the strut free by feel alone. Buster pressed against his leg the entire time, an anchor with no contractual function my division could name, and hauled me clear with a grip that should not, by any tissue density model my species had run on his, have held against my mass. It was in that moment, freed by a blind man guided by an animal bonded to him through nothing my civilization's 9,000 audited relationships could account for, that I understood my contract. Scar had never meant what 180 cycles of division doctrine told me it meant. I had believed it meant I know precisely what I am owed, and precisely what I owe, and the ledger never requires guessing. Held against Walt Higgins' hands, finding me by touch, guided by a dog with no claws binding it to help at all, I understood the scar meant something far smaller. I had learned to trust only what could be measured. He had built 11 years of the most reliable bond I had ever surveyed on something that could not be measured at all. I did not say this to him. I filed it, because filing was the only vocabulary 180 cycles had given me for something this large, and even as he called for emergency assistance on a device I did not recognize, one hand still resting on Buster's head, I catalogued the sensation the only way I knew how. Structural realignment, category unresolved, severity, total. The review came 10 days later, aboard the recovery vessel, under a tribunal I had helped train in my earlier cycles of service. Division Elder Krath presided. "You transmitted an open distress beacon over an uncontacted world. You accepted direct rescue assistance from a local sentient and from a companion species with no formal standing at all. In violation of protocol you personally enforced against 31 prior candidate worlds. Do you dispute the record?" "I do not dispute the record." "Then justify your continued position on this transcript alone." I did not read from prepared documentation. 180 cycles of contract law had given me precise vocabulary for obligation and term and remedy, and none of it contained the argument I needed, so I built the case from the catalog instead. "Elder Krath, I have audited 9,000 bonded relationships. I know precisely what happens to cooperation when no enforceable term binds it. It dissolves, predictably. The moment cost exceeds convenience. I have 12 days of continuous observation of a bond between a human and a companion animal, sustained 11 years, through injury, through expense neither party could formally recover, through an offer of replacement explicitly declined, held together by nothing our division's most rigorous audit could identify as contractual, and when my own crew was pinned and unrecoverable, it was that same undocumented bond, man and animal, together, guided by nothing enforceable, that found us first and freed us with no claim on us at all. I do not have a classification for a species whose most reliable relationships require no contract to sustain them. I am not asking this division to feel anything about that. I am asking it to explain, on the evidence, how our entire model of what makes loyalty reliable survives contact with a bond that outperformed every audited relationship in my 9,000-case career. You are describing one relationship, Krath said, though her voice had lost its opening edge. Not a species-wide structural claim. I am describing a relationship type this survey confirmed recurring across the observed population, elder, at a frequency and durability our contractual models cannot explain and did not predict. I have the footage. I do not have certainty what it means for the classification. I am certain only that loyalty requires contract does not survive this record intact. The chamber held silent long enough that I believed I had achieved nothing. Your position is suspended pending formal review, Krath said finally. Not revoked. The classification is logged provisionally as bond model reassessment. Contractual framework insufficient. This division has never applied that designation before. It will require extended study before any attaché, present or future, closes this file. It was not vindication. It was a door left open rather than sealed, and I understood, filing the ruling, that it was more than my breach of protocol had any right to earn me. I wrote my formal assessment across the following days in the technical language the division required. Bond duration data, asymmetric expenditure ratios, cross-referenced incident timelines. Buried in the final appendix, where doctrine does not require sentiment and therefore will not scrutinize it, I wrote, Subject Walt Higgins maintains an 11-year interspecies bond with no contractual structure, formal renewal term, or enforceable reciprocity mechanism, sustained through asymmetric material sacrifice and explicit rejection of favorable substitution. I cannot certify this bond type as an anomaly. I can certify only that it outperformed every audited relationship in my career for reliability, and that I no longer trust the premise my division was founded on, that loyalty without contract is unenforceable and therefore unreliable. I have observed the opposite to be true at least once, and I cannot certify it was the only time. The report moved up the chain to elders who had never had unaudited hands find them by touch alone in the dark. I returned to limited duty once the inquiry closed without formal sanction, uncertain whether I had earned that mercy or simply been extended one I had not yet learned how to repay. I keep an unofficial file now, one no division has requested. Passive surveillance confirms Walt Higgins and Buster are unchanged. They still cross the same streets together, guided by nothing my 9,000 audits could ever formally recognize as binding. I do not fully understand what holds that bond together without a clause to enforce it. I have stopped needing the clause to respect what it built. I do not look at my contract scar the way I once did. For 180 cycles it meant I know exactly what is owed, and I never mistake sentiment for a debt someone is obligated to pay. I understand now it meant something smaller. I had learned to trust only what could be measured and enforced. He built 11 years on something that could be neither, and it never once failed him. I do not know if I will encounter Walt Higgins again. My division has not authorized further contact, and I have not requested it, though the request remains drafted, unsent, in the same file as everything else about this world I have not yet closed. If it comes to that, if some future crisis brings me into range of a species my own doctrine still cannot fully classify, I have already decided what I will do. I am simply waiting for the moment someone asks it of me.